Great, thank you very much, and thank you for the opportunity to come and talk to you today. So my team, the research and intelligence team that I co-lead at Ofcom, we collect the evidence base across all of the sectors we regulate. So telecoms, media, post, and now of course online safety. So we've been very much gearing up for that. So in the next 20 minutes or so, I'll talk you through some of the work we've done in building that evidence base, some of the key challenges we face, and how the evidence base fits into the regulatory roadmap. So just a quick overview of what I'm going to cover, the good, the bad, and the potentially harmful. So, or today's theme, the internet we want, the internet we don't want, and the internet that lots of people want, but might not be good for us. So I'll then skip through the key findings and challenges across the evidence base. So in those three sections, understanding harms, understanding services, and understanding safety measures. So that's the sort of the main part of the presentation really, but it really will be a canter that does scratch the surface only of what we've been doing. So, I mean, there are over 100 illegal harms listed in the online safety bill. Our estimate of the number of in-scope services is around 150,000, or there's quite a big margin around that. And the amount of work we've been doing has been pretty staggering, actually. So our online safety research project tracker details 108 projects in the last year or so. So anyway, I'll move on. So the good, the internet we want. Can you hear me okay? Yep, okay. So the internet we all want is the one in which we have a good balance between our online and offline life. We can be ourselves, share our opinions, have a voice online, and in which our mental health is supported. And so the good news is that we're broadly in agreement that we're getting that, or at least we're either in agreement or we're neutral. You see that the red there are the people who disagree with those statements. And the good we want for society. Similarly, more of us think that the internet is good for society than think it's bad for society, although a lot are unsure. Apologies, that chart, that should be 36% internet is good for society, 33% neutral, and about 32% images damaging for society. I don't know why that's gone wrong, but apologies. So the bad, what we don't want. So we all know there's things on the internet that we don't want. Highest levels of concern are perhaps unsurprisingly about content depicting the sexual abuse or exploitation of children. So the potentially harmful, what some of us want sometimes. Of course, the challenges are in the trade-offs between protecting the rights of people to express themselves freely on the internet and protecting internet users from harmful and offensive content and experiences. And here the views are pretty balanced. And apologies again, I've had my chart pack. It should be roughly even between free speech advocates and protection prioritizers. But while there isn't consensus, more people than not think that more online safety measures are needed. So 46% with only 25% disagreeing. Women and minority ethnic groups were more likely to be in favor of more online safety measures, maybe linked to them being more exposed to particular types of online harms. So moving through 3 pillars for understanding the online safety system. So it's a really complicated landscape that we need to make sense of in order to develop policy to make the internet the safer place that most of us want, while also protecting freedom of expression that most of us also want. The challenges in building the evidence base are quite different from those we have faced at Ofcom in the sectors we currently regulate. So media, telecoms, post, where the metrics we collect to monitor those markets are generally fairly simple quantitative metrics, revenues, investments, subscribers, market shares, satisfaction levels, switching levels. Whereas monitoring online safety is more likely to be about interactions within that system, users' connections, their interactions with each other and with the services they're on, their experiences and behaviors. So I'm going to talk through these 3 pillars as a way into that. So firstly, on understanding harms. So we monitor the prevalence of potential harms through our online experiences tracker. This is a quantitative survey that we run twice a year. And when potential harms are considered collectively, 62% of of adults encountered at least one potentially harmful piece of content or harmful behavior, we ask, in the last 4 weeks. And the average number of harms that people come across is 3 in those 4 weeks. And we classify those harms by the 3 C's, by content, contact, and commercial. And so perhaps quite interesting that, that those contact harms, so unwanted messages and contact from other users, are as prevalent as content harms. We asked the same questions to teenagers, so a few differences. So slightly higher exposure to harms, so 68% exposed to a potential harm in the last 4 weeks, that compared to 62% of adults, and more by way of contact harms. So over half of teenagers, 57%, experience contact harms, so things like trolling, bullying, etc. If we look in detail at the most common harms, how they break down, the most common potential harm for all adults is scams, fraud, and phishing. So the commercial harms there are shown in blue, content harms in red, and contact harms in amber. So interestingly, generally older users experience fewer harms, perhaps through less depth of internet usage, but scams, phishing, and fraud they skew more heavily towards those older age groups. And on the right hand side, we've got the comparable data for teenagers, more likely to be affected by contact harms, so unwelcome friend or follow requests, trolling, online bullying. So in addition to asking questions about the harms people have experienced, we also asked them about the harms that they are most concerned about. Some harms have very high concern but very low experience. So for example, child sexual abuse and exploitation material, while others have high experience but low concern, for example, offensive or bad language. But there are some harms that have high experience and high concern. For adults, that's scams and fraud, also misinformation. And for teenagers, it's bullying, abusive behavior and threats, and also hateful, offensive, or discriminatory content. So I noted earlier that we've run 108 different research projects in the last year. A majority of those have been qualitative in nature, as it's only through talking to people that we can really get a sense of how they come across a harm and what its impact is. So this is an example of a piece that we've done in looking at the impact of online fraud and scams. So from a 2,000 people survey, we identified 38 people that we then followed up on. So that report was published earlier this year. So that type of research has really informed the development of a model for how harms manifest. So we use a combination of quantitative and qualitative research to develop a framework looking at the mechanisms by which online content and conduct may give rise to harm. So again, published September 2022. So we've tested and then refined that framework using the real life experiences identified through qualitative research. So for example, the report contained 27 different case studies. The example shown here tests the model through the experience of a teenager whose online experiences led her to eating disorders, self-harm, and attempted suicide. So sort of key learning from this really is that we need to understand both the risk factors and how they interact, the type of content exposed to, who distributes it, the characteristics of the user and their circumstances, the characteristics of the user base of the platform, and the functionalities of the platform. So, a functionality which gives status and popularity based on what's posted has an impact in this particular case study. So just want to conclude this section with just to highlight a particular research challenge that we face, researching children online. So children's online experiences and how they can be studied are really very different from adults. So the issues that we need to consider as researchers include the risks around exposing children to potentially harmful topics, how we obtain informed consent from children, and ensuring studies reflect actual behaviour. There's big differences between what children say and what they do, It's also difficult sort of capturing data from children because you don't know if they're using a device, whether it's a shared device or not, for example. It's also really expensive research, so we face those constraints. Just want to highlight three pilot studies that we've done looking at that. Firstly, we've worked with schools, school being sort of probably the safest environment, working with teachers in exploring the harms that people are exposed to, children are exposed to online. Passive monitoring. So a key part of our evidence base across online is what people do online, i.e. the sites they visit. It gives a whole bunch of data. We've got really quite rich data from the Ofcom funded Ipsos Iris data set, but that only covers children. It's funded by, sorry, that only covers adults. It's funded by the advertising community, and they frankly don't really want to know what children do online. So we've set up a panel looking at what children are doing. So by monitoring the devices that they use. And third on the right, avatar-based research. A really good way of understanding the types of content that children get exposed to is by setting up a fictional profile. So we've created some fictional profiles based on the behavior of real children, the youngest age 4 up to age 12 in this pilot, across many different platforms. And then we can just assess the content that is pushed to them and the risk that they're exposed to. There's of course more in the sort of children's space. So we face real challenges in looking at some of the more serious harmful experiences online, online grooming, content promoting suicide, where we need to talk to children about it, but it's very sensitive. So we have a sort of a trauma-informed approach, working with very skilled professionals. Sorry, is that better? Can you hear me okay? Right, okay, is that better? That sounds better to me. Yeah, good, right, apologies for that. Yeah, so I was just saying that, in this sort of journey that we've been down through building our evidence base, we've had to sort of think very carefully about the policies and guidelines that we develop. Can be very frustrating because it seems to add a lot of timelines to every piece of research, but it's really fundamental to what we do. So moving on to services. So this chart shows how we spend our time online. People in the UK, it's a lot of time. It's about 4 hours a day on average for adults, and that is only across smartphones, tablets, and PCs. So the notable exclusion is connected television. So much of Netflix viewing, for example, isn't included. So 3 things to note, all quite obvious, but useful for framing the challenge of regulating for online safety. Firstly, that a lot of time is spent on a small number of platforms. So almost an hour and a half if you add up the Meta and Alphabet platforms. So there's particular responsibility on those mainstream internet giants who are, of course, very, very well resourced. Secondly, a lot of time is spent on user-to-user sites characterized by content uploaded by users and which facilitate contact between users. So those most popular sites you'll see on the right-hand side. But of course, there is a long tail. So that 1 hour and 52 on the left is everything else. So, a real challenge in understanding those services. So we do find that most harms are encountered on the major user-to-user platforms. In part, that's the consequence of the number of users they have, but you'll see from that chart there are some differences. So 43% of those who said they'd been exposed to any harm in the last 4 weeks said that their most recent harm was on Facebook, and that compares to just 6% on YouTube. But YouTube does have a higher reach, and users on YouTube spend on average more time on it. Another factor is that big platforms are also often the gateway to higher risk smaller platforms. So this analysis looks specifically at 9 prominent adult pornography platforms. And it shows that the green there shows the share of traffic coming to it that has originated from a social media service. The purple says the share of that has come from Twitter. So you'll see that the fan sites are very, very dependent on referrals from social media, and particularly from Twitter. And of course, another big driver of traffic to these services is search engines, also within scope of the Online Safety Bill. It's particularly the case for the tube sites at the top. For example, 36% of Pornhub traffic originates from a search engine, and the majority of that from Google. So we've done a lot of work to understand service functionalities. A fundamental part of the online safety regime will be the requirement for services to produce risk profiles and risk assessments. So a couple of things to highlight on this slide. On the left-hand side is an overview of the functionalities on video sharing platforms that are actually in scope of our current regulation. And that table is extracted from a document we published in October 2022, which was a detailed assessment of all those video sharing platforms. For example, the TikTok assessment ran to 16 pages. Then on the right-hand side, we've been collating a vast range of research to inform our register of risks for illegal content. That provides a body of evidence for platforms to use when assessing their services against the risks associated with 17 different categories of illegal offences. That's to be published when the Online Safety Bill is enacted, alongside our consultation on codes of practice. So that data combines our own research with over 500 third-party research sources. We also have begun work on a separate register in relation to protection of children. So just to highlight a research challenge, an obvious issue is how do we understand harms in that long tail of platforms? And firstly, it's not easy to even scale how many services are in the scope of the regime. So to estimate that, we built a data set of millions of internet services and their characteristics, and then ran a classification model that classified them as likely in scope or out of scope based on those three areas of the Online Safety Bill, so user-to-user services, search services, and pornography services. So you'll see that the range is big. DCMS at the time of doing the impact assessment for the Online Safety Bill estimated 25,000 in-scope services. Our best estimate is about 150,000. And so to understand that long tail, we can't use consumer research or seek data from the platforms. We do need automated tools. So our data science teams have scoped a number of pilots to develop insights and monitor that long tail. The first one there at the top there is the one referenced in the previous slide, just identifying the in-scope services, and the other pilots below build on that. To highlight a couple that will help us identify the scale of issues and focus our attention. So in green there, terms of service. So we'll be looking to scrape the terms of service that platforms have and then run automated tools to look for indicators of compliance or non-compliance. And then right at the bottom, so we're looking to develop and train a model of risk indicators that can provide a risk score for in-scope platforms. All right, so the final section, understanding safety measures. So most people have taken some form of action when coming across a harm. Only 15% of people say they take no action. A third say that they use reporting functions. Others may respond by disengaging or blocking or unfriending. As far as sort of satisfaction with reporting, about half of people say they're satisfied when they've reported. That's probably linked to the fact that only 49% of them hear anything back once they've reported something. So that there's clearly a bit of work that's needed doing there. So we've done a lot of work to identify the safety measures used by platforms. For example, we mapped the safety measures employed by 35 different services, which are commonly used by children. So just some things to highlight. So we grouped those safety measures into those 5 broad categories shown there, just to highlight a few things. So some platforms make reporting harmful content very prominent. Others, a good example is Reddit, encourage users to look at alternatives before reporting. So whether resolving users to sort out issues between themselves or just advising them not to view the content anymore. Most platforms have age restrictions of 13+, but they rely on self-certification. There's a whole issue there, which I haven't got time to get into. But
But even if they can get that age verification right, which they clearly haven't, there's very few restrictions there's very little gating of 18 plus content. So once you're proved as 13, you can pretty much access anything on these services. There are exceptions. YouTube is a very significant exception to that. And the tagging of content as being mature or not is often left to users. And the criteria that can be applied is the advice they provide is pretty generic generally and very open to interpretation. So we're doing a piece of work looking at Twitch at the moment. So just to finish off that section, an area that we've really been investing in is a behavioral insight team that sits across my team, the research and intelligence team, and also the economics team. They've been doing work on online safety, but just to highlight a couple of other areas which are related and very relevant. So our Making Sense of Media program, about promoting the development of digital literacy skills, both from an online safety perspective, but also from a digital inclusion perspective. And so we're using BI research to investigate what types of media literacy interventions work best in getting people engaged. And talks about those 150,000 in-scope services. We've got a real challenge to promote compliance amongst those. And so we're doing BI research to inform our approach to how we can get platforms to engage and comply. So this slide is an example of a BI experiment we've run to investigate user engagement and empowerment. I can't do it justice here, but very, very briefly, the objective of the research was to look at the impact of warnings about potentially harmful videos before viewing a video on a video sharing platform. So we had 3 videos, all legal but potentially harmful content, one showing misinformation, one showing scenes of violence, and one showing offensive language. And we had 3 types of warning. We had a generic warning, i.e. this video may contain sensitive material. We had what we call social proofing warning. This video contains material that other viewers on this platform have reported as being sensitive. And then we had a specific warning message. This video contains misinformation or scenes of violence or offensive language. And then we had a control with no message. And so the bars there show the percentage of viewers that skipped either none on the left up to all 3 videos on the right. So alert messages did increase the likelihood of videos being skipped by users by between about 50% and 70% compared to the control group. And the specific messages had a little bit more impact. But the findings go a bit broader than that. So the majority of research participants didn't find the alert messages to be annoying, which is something that platforms push back on. And those who were exposed to the alert messages and chose to watch the video generally didn't regret their decision to watch that video. We also find that those that have read the warning and then watch a video for longer than those that haven't seen a warning at all, that might be likely to sort of abort partway through. I will skip the second online experiment we have and just wrap up. So our next steps, 3 stages as we following royal assent to the online safety bill, which we hope will happen in the autumn. The first thing that we'll do pretty much immediately is our consultation on illegal harms. 6 months after that, child safety duties and pornography. And just to sort of link the research into that, we'll be publishing codes of practice and our register of risks and risk profiles, all underpinned by some of the evidence I've shared, but a whole lot more. Then the sort of the third phase is the transparency, user empowerment, and other duties, specifically on categorized platforms. And I should just highlight that today we've published a call for evidence on thresholds for categorized platforms. So there will be some platforms that have based on certain threshold, be they size, number of users, or risk profile, that will have specific duties, and we're consulting on what those thresholds should be. And my final slide. So much of what I've talked through is the evidence that we're building for the setup of the regime. But of course, we need to develop processes and data collection for ongoing monitoring and evaluation when the regime is live. So there is a bit of a shift in gear for us. And I'd just highlight a couple of things, really. Firstly, we'll have a real focus on outcome metrics and how the dial changes or doesn't. And use of information gathering powers from platforms will be really, really important there. We've been working without those, obviously, until the bill is enacted. once we have that baseline data, the focus will be on tracking both intended and unintended metrics. So unintended metrics could be, for example, people leaving the supervised platforms and going elsewhere. It could be impacting on sort of freedom of expression. And in looking at that, I think it's inevitable that we'll be using bigger and bigger data sets. So we are investing in our data science teams, machine learning, econometricians, based on where data is available. And the other area of investment I've talked about is behavioral insight research, which is perhaps most useful where real world data is not available, so where we can run experiments. So that is the end of my presentation. So I hope it's given you a sense both of the online safety landscape and also of some of the research challenges. Hopefully we'll have time for a question or two. If not, you can contact me there.
Thanks, Ian. So now we have an opportunity to ask. Questions. As a reminder, if you're asking a question in the room, can you please raise your hand and switch on the microphone when asked to do so? And then if you're asking a question online, please submit through the question and answers section on Zoom. If you are asking a question, please do state your name and organisation as well for the room to hear. The Q&A will also be held in compliance with the IGF Code of Conduct. So are there any questions in the room to start? At the back.
Thank you. I'm Maeve Walsh. I'm from Carnegie UK. And thank you, Ian, for that presentation. There's a huge amount of detail in there and clearly a huge amount of work that has been going on over a number of years at Ofcom now. And I know from hearing your colleagues speak at various events, the regulator is very much ready to go now once the bill receives word assent, which, given the delays so far, is really good news. I just had a question in terms of the likely engagement from the platforms. And obviously you've made the distinction between the big platforms and then the long tail of smaller platforms, and whether your experience with the VSP regulations tells you anything about that kind of before and after engagement, before regulation and after regulation, and whether that is going to possibly alter or affect the way you go into that sort of implementation phase.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good point. And we've been fortunate in some respects to have the sort of VSP regime as a way of having a little bit of a trial run on a smaller scale for the online safety duties. And I mean, it feels like quite a mixed picture, if I'm honest, with the video sharing platforms. We have differing levels of engagement. I think that one thing it perhaps tells us is that well, two things actually I'll highlight. One, that when we're getting data out of any platform, it has to be an iterative process, because our initial data requests, provoke more questions than data, frankly. So it's, we need to be pretty firm on that. And secondly, is that, I mean, I think there's we need some way of sort of grouping the platforms to some extent, in that many platforms work with us very closely, and we have very good relationships with. Other platforms, they lean towards disengagement, and so I think we need to be really quite thinking about where we take enforcement action. And I think we sort of recognise that this is it's a reasonably long road, but in order to get there as quick as we can, we need to be firm with some platforms while engaging very sort of positively and respectfully with the others. So yeah, so I think it's a mixed picture, and when we come to classify our platforms as to those that we supervise and those that we don't, that classification will be informed both by the scale of the platform, but really also by the risk presented to them. And with those supervised platforms, we need to have pretty fixed procedures about how we engage with them.
We've got one more question in the room, and then we've got a couple online.
Hello. Yeah, thank you so much for this presentation. Marvelous insights to have. About that, I'm just to comment on the trend where we've seen some social media platforms trying to lock down access to really relevant data that could be really valuable for researchers to have in order to anticipate social trends, or, as you just said, raise awareness and continue the research on what's happening on those spaces. And I'm just wondering how do you position yourself towards partnerships and collaborations between researchers, research institutes, and private companies?
Yeah.
And if there's a work that Ofcom is leading towards that.
Right. Okay. There's two things that I'd say in relation to that. I mean, firstly, you maybe alluded to the sort of the researcher access provisions in the online safety bill, which, if I'm being honest, haven't gone as far as I'd have liked. I mean, I think there's differing opinions in Ofcom and elsewhere, but we haven't got the level of requirements on platforms for researcher access. And what that means is platforms making their data available to researchers. The provisions in the Digital Service Act and in the European Union are a bit stronger, but we have, I think it's 2 years down the line, we'll have a requirement to produce a report on researcher access. So hopefully we get more done there. Secondly, I mean, as far as working with third parties, I mean, I think fundamentally that is a big difference in the online safety regime to the other sectors that we regulate, in that the landscape is just so broad that I think that, arguably we're sort of guilty sometimes as a regulator with a reasonably well-funded research teams of jumping straight to our own research. I don't think that's possible in online safety. So I think that we've got two jobs that we fundamentally need to do. One of which is we need to be really aware of all the multitude of research that's published, and have processes in place for quality assurance, just making sure that we're using that research to gain access. Secondly, we need to form some strategic partnerships with research organizations. I think we're still working through what that looks like. I mean, one idea that we have, I'm not sure if we'll go with it or not, will be to publish possibly annually a list of research questions that says these are the things that we are interested in exploring this year. It would be more a sort of a discussion document, possibly a call for evidence. I'm not quite sure what we call it, that would then hopefully put us in touch with all the institutions that are doing that sort of research, and also perhaps become a mechanism for institutions that are looking to raise funding for research to work with us and make it happen. But fundamentally, I agree. And actually, within the research and intelligence team that I work in, I think there is a shift in the work that we do away from commissioning research. We'll still do that, but towards building partnerships and using third-party research. So, one of my takes on that, for example, is I think that then shifts the balance of our resourcing. In that I think we perhaps, we're spending less money on research, but we perhaps need more headcount and staff for monitoring that third-party research and building partnerships.
Unfortunately, I think we're now out of time for this session, but we're going to have to cut to a quick break just because we're experiencing some tech issues. So we'll let people know when we'll be resuming for the next session.